So our next speaker is my old friend and colleague, Robert Holden, who's a landscape architect, 40 years of practice, overlapping with 3 decades of teaching, 2 of which were at the Greenwich and then at the Technical University in Istanbul. He was brought up in Preston, but is an adopted Londoner, and currently manure monitor for the gun site allotments in Dulwich.
There's promotion.
The manure is very high grade. It's all being passed by the king. Hello, everybody. Oh, can you hear me at the back? Yes. So Bermondsey Beautification through the 20s and 30s. I first heard about what I thought of as being street beautification in Bermondsey when doing my landscape architecture course in Newcastle, starting in 68 to 69 to 71. Tim would know about this. Jimmy, there's South London Road Assessment, which we did as classmates. I remember the initial meeting, which was in the Department of Transport. The civil servant advised us, you may not use the word beautification. Yep, because it had political overtones, which that will go on to. Yeah. One was tempted to say, well, could have used the word identification, but we didn't. So what I'm going to be doing is describing a place, that's the Metropolitan Borough of Bermondsey, a couple, Ada and Alfred Salter. Ada, I think more than Alfred, perhaps. The story's probably the other way around. And basically a programme for making life better for the people of Bermondsey through the 20s and 30s. So Bermondsey was a metropolitan borough. Metropolitan boroughs were established within the London County Council area in 1900, and they were superseded by the London boroughs. It's now part of Southwark. It was ended in 1965. So you can see it here. And the whole area is the London County Council area, which now extends out to about where my hand is, perhaps. So that's Bermondsey. London Bridge Station there, the old London to Greenwich Railway going through here, Bricklayers Arms here, for those who know it, the Surrey Commercial Docks on the right-hand side. There we've got Southwark Park, which was opened in 1867, which was London County Council. Designs of Alexander Mackenzie, who was a pupil of mine, by the way. But the point about this, and it comes from Dr. Kernan's 1935 book, he was the Chief Medical Officer of Health, was the green areas are below high watermark, and the yellow areas are below high watermark. It was damp. That's not a daily scene. That's the Great Flood of January 1928. But on a daily basis, lots of houses built in the 19th century, no DPC, dampness. The other point, sorry about the slide here, it's rather corrupt, but basically the area was either terrace gravel below the railway line or alluvium above the railway line. No shrinkable clay. This becomes important. No clay indeed at all. No shrinkable clay. This becomes important in relation to the sorts of planting that you see later on. This is an indication of what it was socially. So, no upper middle classes or the wealthy. Just a few middle class, well-to-do people, the red here and there. This is by Guy's Hospital. So it was either fairly comfortable, good, ordinary people, or quite a lot of the poor, which are these pinkish areas, and there's the very poor, which are these streets, the grey streets, And then there's the lowest class, vicious and semi-criminal. Visiting Charles Bruce assembled these maps of the whole of London by walking the streets with the local Bobby, the local police constable, who against that particular view. So it was a settled community, but it was impoverished. It was very, very poor. Very Roman Catholic, lots of Irish migration, particularly in connection with the railways which were built, all of them on viaduct from the London Trench Railway, which was 1837ish, late 1830s onwards. And it was quite a proud community. In terms of population, in the 20s and 30s, it was 120,000 odd, down to probably just below about 96,000 by 1940. There's the Surrey Commercial Docks, which is where the men worked. Men worked either in the docks or they worked on the railways, Leclerc's Arms, and so on, goods yards, freight yards. That's the Hove Docks and Millwall Docks and so on. The Surrey Commercial Docks were very much involved with importing timber from the Baltic. If you were a docker, you didn't have security of tenure. You didn't have a permanent job. You basically bumped on, assembled in a crowd like that, and the foreman chose you, the gaffer chose you at the beginning of the day, and if you weren't chosen, you didn't earn anything. So it was really quite a hard life. Yeah, this is actually from the Millwall Docks. There was some industry. There was quite a lot of industry, particularly noxious trades like leather. I read last week there were about 12 tanneries left in the whole country. Well, that wasn't the situation in the 19th century or in the before the Second World War, or indeed until the 1970s. In fact, in a factory just along here, the Alaska factory, a couple of 100,000 sheepskin flying jackets made in the Second World War. But it was a noxious trade. It's a pretty horrible trade, actually. And the other horrible things, you've got things like under the railway arches, the storage of manure or pure dog feces, which were both used in tanning, which Dr. Conan, as Chief Medical Officer of Health from 1925, was very concerned about, named Bogshole. The women worked particularly in the food factories, about 30 or 40 food factories by the 1920s and through to the 1930s. Both jam factories, Harford's Jam and so on, Cross and Bracknell. The unmarried women worked in the canning factories, or also canning manufacturers. The married women worked in the jam factories. By the way, it could be quite dangerous. If substandard glass was used, the jars could explode and bind you. Yeah? I'll touch on this later on. So if you go to the bottom collection, you can see what the problems were. There are medical officer of health reports, sanitary conditions. This is 1939, and you can see what the concerns were from a health point of view. Diphtheria, scarlet fever, polio, smallpox, pneumonia, ophthalmia, which is an eye condition, puerperal fever, which is postpartum. Basically, it's a problem of the womb, infection of the womb, measles, whooping cough, anthrax, and separate area tuberculosis, which you could be dealing with. This is from the same report. Housing. The point about this is the medical officer of health was the official who declared areas for slum clearance as being insanitary. So these are slum clearance areas in 1939. Well, with eradication of bed bugs, which is still a problem apparently. Certainly is in Newcastle, and it was there in 65. Infant mortality rate. We've got the 10-year period before 1938. The number of for the whole borough fell from 160 per annum to, in 1939, 45. So they were getting some things right from a medical point of view. Is the argument. It is pretty well substantiated. If you look at tuberculosis of the respiratory system, the number of deaths, these are the old Vespers. So look at the whole borough. It fell from, in 1929, 117 down to, for the whole borough, 65. This is, of course, prior to the 1940s. There was no really effective antibacteriological treatment of tuberculosis. It was a condition that had to be managed. This is Gustav Dorrit's image of London. It's actually from west of Waterloo, the Pennington, I think. But it was the same sort of landscape. Low, flat, the railways on viaducts, smoke everywhere, and fairly difficult. But in fact, in Bermondsey, in terms of backyards, all these were tenanted. They weren't looked after. They were pretty run down. That, I believe, is possibly a bed. People sleeping outside. Just to touch on that, and that's another very typical shop. So poorly maintained tenants' houses. And these are the summaries of one family. Those are the 3 people living in one room, not living in a house, living in one room. Yeah. 2 families, 10 living in the one room, multi-generation families. I can relate this to my own father. He was born in 1930 in Hayward, Lancashire, 13 Buxton Street. They actually had a 4-room terrace house, and there were 8 children in the family. So all the girls slept at one end of the bed, little bed, and all the boys slept at the other end of the bed. I hope they washed their feet. But these are what congested areas were like. One of the condemned areas about demolished. So the coal here, the atmosphere was filthy. Everything was heated by coal. I can just about remember that. Newcastle, where I was higher education, was one of the last areas to have smoke control. Every morning on the windowsill there was soot, great hogs of soot, which you wiped off. The loos and the tap was outside. Of course, the loos outside, so you had a bucket or you had hot potty inside. You might drop it, it might spill. It wasn't particularly sanitary. So that's the one tap for 3 houses. And as it is in a report from the South London Press, with the to the right, the kitchens and lavatories. So, second theme, Ada and Alfred Salter. She had been brought up in Rounds in Northamptonshire. She didn't move to London until she was 30, or then the late 1860s, and came from a Wesleyan Methodist family. Fascinated, really enthusiastic about gardens and flowers. She did do a short course at the University of Cambridge, but I don't know the nature of the short course or how short it was. Alfred Salter was brought up on Lewisham Hill near Greenwich, and his family originally were from Devon. They were Plymouth Brethren, and he turned agnostic when he went to Guy's Hospital. He was a high flyer, at Guy's, and he did very well. Ada actually did a lot of the spade work in terms of committee work and influencing. Both of them promoted ideas, the ideas that I shall describe. So you've got a political biography there. 1897, born in 1897, joins Bermondsey settlement, which was a Methodist settlement, basically trying to bring ideas of a better life to people. She set up a chess club. She was basically, in modern terms, a social worker or a youth worker. Very good at dealing with people, apparently. First of all, elected Paul got guardians, and a particular point we will come to later on, but in 1919, she was elected as an independent Labour Party councillor for Bermondsey Council, and persuaded the Liberal Party, who were then in power, to set up a Beautification and Public Amenities Committee. But before that, they did some other things. The dock workers and transport workers, railway workers struck. They were all men. Women didn't strike. It's the women who brought in the weekly pay that you want. That kept the family going. Yeah. She persuaded the women of Bermondsey, and there she is, to strike, working in the food factories. So they all dressed up in their Sunday best, and it was the first strike by women in 1911. And it changed conditions. It was successful. Alfred, he along with Joyce, their daughter, who died of scarlet fever at the age of 8, he became a Quaker in 1900, married Ada, an austere couple, water at the temperance wedding. They were pacifists. They believed in universal suffrage. They believed in a better society. He became MP for West Bermondsey in 1922, and basically died and served as an MP until 45. He didn't stand in the 45 election. He was too ill by then. And he was also an alderman of Bermondsey Borough Council from 1924 to 45. Aldermen, do you know what they were? They were elected by the councillors, who had been elected by the universal suffrage. That's how that worked. He was a doctor, so from Guy's, he first of all done obstetrics, and then became a researcher at the Lister Institute, which was a bit like the Francis Crick Institute. It was high-powered, it was well-managed, and it was doing bacteriological research. And he worked there for 2 or 3 years, and then met Ada, devoted his life, he was still living in Bermondsey near Guy's Hospital, devoted his life to the people of Bermondsey. So by 1924, he'd been elected as an MP, and that's a typical shot of how he got around Bermondsey on a bike. A bit like Boris Johnson, actually. In 1914, they set up the London Labour Cooperative Bakery. One of the things about flour in the 19th century is that alum, which is fairly poisonous, it's an aluminium sulfate compound, was being added, or things like plaster of Paris was being added to bread to make it whiter. And so the quality of the bread was important. The Labour Cooperative Bakery existed through the 20s and 30s, totally separate from the council, and improved the standard of bread at affordable prices. So that's just what I think, that's the background that they're interested in. Great joiner of the committees was Ada. So housing, maternity, public health committees, and also at the same time an LCC councillor, and similarly Alfred. So maternity services, they got the perinatal mortality rates down. Yeah. So one thing they did was during the Great War, there'd been conscientious objectors, then supporting conscientious objectors, they'd been pacifists. So they put together some monies from friends and bought fair before they adopted and set it up as a convalescent home in 1924. The point about conscientious objectors, by the way, is after serving in prison where you were force fed, you were basically used to go to hospital because you were not in a good condition. Yeah, or you force feeding us, putting a stew down into your stomach. So it was necessary to do that. Lovely place, and basically the young mothers of Bermondsey could stay for 2 weeks or more if necessary, bring along a couple of their children and have a pleasant time outside, in this case playing croquet in what was then the countryside outside of London in Dartford. This is a photograph later on from 1940. This is the nursery, Fairby Grange, and these are some of the older children. Fairby Grange also had a farm, and so they established a tree nursery there. And that's it today. It's now become a dementia home. It existed with Bermondsey until 1947, and when the NHS took over health services nationally, it was disposed of eventually. First of all, it was privatised, and then it was sold off in 1956. Tuberculosis treatment, typically for skeletal tuberculosis. That's tuberculosis that's gone from the lungs into the bones. You could have, first of all, you got pulmonary tuberculosis, then it spread. You could get skin tuberculosis, all sorts of tuberculosis. But one issue was what Colin called skeletal. Devotee of Dr. Rollier. So from 1924 to the outbreak of war, 1939, 4 to 6 patients went each year to Laysan in the Swiss Alps and experienced the sunlight cure. So that's before and after. This is skeletal. I mean, imagine trying to treat that as surgical. By surgical means, it basically meant lifetime deformity. You could take the hump away, but there were problems that resulted. And that's after sunlight treatment. Similarly, tuberculosis of the spine. So there's August really in the middle. The idea was that ultraviolet light was good for you, which it is. I mean, 1890s, it was shown that it reduced bacteria. Niels Finsen, I read just before we started, got a Nobel Prize for his research in 1904 on that. But the way that Rollier took treatment was something different. It wasn't just a question of opening and experiencing the outdoors, which is what we're, as Homo sapiens, were intended to do. It was also using sunlight to improve, to bolster the immune system by creating vitamin D. You know, vitamin D isn't really a vitamin. Vitamins are additives. Yeah, it's basically a pro-hormone. It's a misnamed vitamin. Yeah. And the treatment wasn't a question of what you do on the beach or what some people do on the beach. It was a question of gradually exposing the body. So first of all, 5 minutes just there and the head, and then gradually, as we went through a period of treatment, we exposed a number of minutes. This was done at over 1,000 meters, over 4,000 or 5,000 feet. He had a series of sanatoria, and at its weakest, and it was associated with exercise and good diet. I suggest that this is landscape of that cigar. These are older patients, and you can see how they're gradually being exposed. So, you can't do that to the whole of the Bermondsey. It's in the most severe cases that were sent to Switzerland. So they used artificial ultraviolet light to also treat, and were treating up to 30,000 a year in Solarium, Range Road. Another form of treatment with tuberculosis, Salter himself had tuberculosis, according to one biographer. He was infected at Guy's, according to another biographer. He was infected at grammar school in Greenwich, but it reoccurred in 1909. So for the next, at least for the next 2 decades, he slept outside of his back garden. And the Borough Council supplied tuberculosis patients with an outdoor bed, so you can put it in your backyard, in your back garden. But it went beyond that. 1914, the previous medical officer of health, Dr. Brown, had proposed an open-air school for the treatment of tuberculosis. That led to a voluntary school during the war years, and then, by which time Ada Salter was an LCC council as well. They persuaded the London County Council to set up an open-air school in Fort Road. The ideas behind this come from Germany. 1904, the school in Charlottenburg in the Grunewald, a forest school, basically, for tuberculosis patients. So they were known as Waldschule. The French also adopted them. They called them École de Plein Air. So basically 120 children, one medical officer of health who was from Bermondsey, and one nurse. Other things, I'll show shots of kids outside later on, because there were also open air schools. Temporary gardens. This is just by Guy's Hospital, Crosby Road. It was an LCC site, and they engineered or provided for the London Children's Gardens and Recreation Fund to finance scholars, school children from local schools to basically convert this into vegetable gardens. The older students, from 12 to 16-year-olds, the older students filled in the basements. First of all, the council, which was the street cleaning authority. Remember, streets were full of, there were no plastics there, they were full of horse manure. Bedding straw also came from the municipal stables. The dustbin lorries were horse-drawn in the 20s. This existed for several years. When the Independent Labour Party was at that time an affiliate, rather like the Cooperative Party at the moment, of the mainstream Labour Party. One of the main things you can do is, one, improve the sewers, because they're also a sewage authority, So they relayed all the sewers in the 51 miles of Bermondsey streets in the 1920s, according to Dr. Cohen. This source of this information. The other thing is to change the appearance of the streets. It's what Barcelona did when Franco left. You basically just changed the city by planting trees. Street beautification is how I understood that. So what Ada Salter meant and Alfred Salter meant, actually, I think it meant a lot more than just planting trees. You get different figures for the number of trees that they planted. 13,000, 10,000. The reason for that is that they were losing about 600 trees a year due to cars and other vehicles knocking them down, and also to gas leaks. But there you can see trees being planted, and there you can see Burns's forest. He, Dr. Johns, the garden superintendent, was a horticulturist, a gardener, trained gardener. He wasn't just a council official. It's a bit like a spit in that, but it shouldn't. You've got other shots of him. So this is where the Salters lived themselves, where their practice was based. One of the places, it was at various premises. Dr. Salter had about 30,000 patients in a 5 GP practice, by the way. Storks Road, curiously planted with poplar trees. There's a close-up, and you can see the high staging and so on. Not what I would do myself, but anyway. And there you can see London Plains on Beatrice Road in Bermondsey, 1935. And you can see the London Plains still there, that the houses on either side have disappeared, thanks to bombing, or thanks to particularly South in the 60s and 70s rebuilding. But there are areas. Grant, I hope where are you?
Yeah, I got two like keynotes, don't worry.
Take a note of this. This is just by Southwark Park Road. This is where you should walk, because all these trees were planted in the 1920s. So they're 90, getting on to 100 years old. Remember, this is living, it's not London clay. That's Halma Grove. You can guess therefore from the climbing air. You can guess therefore the age of the housing. It dates from the 1850s or possibly into the 1860s, named after places and battles of the Crimean War. That's Goodley Street with London Bridge Station in the background, counted with a line. And that's Tower Bridge Road, which I think is still one of the great thoroughfares, thanks to the trees leading up to the Tower of London. And that's right on the edge of Bermondsey. That's Long Lane, which is parallel with the river, but south of London Bridge. On the right, you can see 4-storey LCC type apartment blocks. There's a story behind that, as opposed to what Bermondsey wanted, which for what they call tenements or traffic houses, they wanted 3-storey blocks. And that's the public health centre in Grange Road. And the usual things, Turkish bars, swimming pools and so on. But it was more than just street tree planting. It was more than just visual items. It was music. There was a symphony orchestra. There were clubs. There was chess. There were playgrounds and there were sports. Southwark Park, which I showed you pictures of earlier on. Initially, the LCC wouldn't allow sports events in their park. And it was some battle to persuade them to have an annual sport event. There were garden competitions and garden shows. So there's the great floral show and sport hunt in Southwark Park in the 1930s. So there we have Mr. P.O. Dell of 27 Rule Road, with presumably Mrs. Odell actually in the picture, and the window box competitions. Oh, there's a nice story about when Ada Salter first moved into the Bermondsey settlement, which is where she lived in the 1890s. And she ordered some window boxes. And the street urchins outside said, "Oh, there are those coffins out there." They associated window boxes with coffins. But it's more than just the two, obviously. I mean, that's the public health staff. I haven't found a photograph of the park and beautification staff. There were about 12 of them. So that's Dr. Kernan. This is the background. Lodging house, that's actually from 1855. But at the top, you've got more than 10 in one room. If you read diaries of the early 18th century, it was very usual to share a bed with strangers. If you were going to an inn, it was pretty usual thing. So to share a room with somebody and have an individual bed is really the height of luxury. But it shows the wetness done. So that's housing. Is the next theme. Ideas of Bermondsey. Bermondsey didn't really want flats as a council, which is ironic considering Southwark Council at the moment are going to be on the point of granting planning approval for a 44-storey apartment block just south of the Elephant Castle, I might add. But this is really what they wanted. They wanted a garden city. So cottages or flats. And they achieved one garden city, Salisbury Street, Salisbury Estate, just off the Jamaica Road. And that's what it looks like now. It's really quite reasonable. The gardens are quite small. They've all got back gardens and very small front gardens and a small public open space. This is in Rotherhithe. They did manage, when they were doing flat developments later on, to sneak in a few what they called cottage houses. Excuse me, I've got to sit down at this point. So this is what Bermondsey wanted, which was 3-storey houses. But their problem was that all their financing had to be guaranteed by the London County Council. So ultimately, they have to provide 4-storey tenement housing. But you can see here what they're wanting. They're wanting light and airiness. That's the sort of housing that was a model, but with associated shops and so on, not 44 stories. And this is just by Crosby Road, side street, with some cottage housing sneaked in, rather uncared for. So this is 1935, and in black, you've got all these slum clearance areas which have been redeveloped throughout the borough, quite a lot in Rotherhithe, to the right. And this is where the Salisbury Street, that's the Jamaica Road, housing estate was, and other large areas in these areas here. Beauty, colour, very keen. Apparently dahlias were very successful. Masses of tulips it reads here in the old churchyard of St James's off Jamaica Road, Bermondsey. This pleasant little oasis is one of London's most congested areas. Is a blaze of colour, is what it says at the bottom. Quotation from the Times. Pity we haven't got a colour photograph of it. So on the left is what was, but on the right is what it can be with lots of lupins there. The problem was it was a very congested area. The Surrey Docks was still commercially active. The main park was London County Council. Where could they build gardens and parks and playgrounds? One, they could buy old factories. Two were churchyards. That's the way that they particularly went. The other thing is that the Tanner Street, remember Ada Salter was on the board of guardians, or the guardians, and was instrumental in getting the old Tanner Street workhouse demolished. But it was particularly like St John's churchyard on your right here, which is what they achieved. So on the left, small derelict area, on the right, become a garden. Playgrounds, St James Churchyard, and Dr. and Ada Salter. Dr. Salter here, and Ada Salter there, planting a tree with Mr. John's, I believe it's Mr. John's, the garden superintendent. They're looking a bit less like a spin. This is the oval day, obviously, so it's a big crowd. People were dressed up. I like this man, who's clearly about 15 or 16, with his cowboy hat on. And the girls at the back of the crowd, they wouldn't see anything. But about taken 5 years later after the opening, with of course the tennis courts that Jon mentioned, but surrounded by masses of colour and planting. You've got to take the colour for so that's a good place in terms of black and white photography. This is 1938, and this is the Tennis Street recreation ground, the slide. 2nd of February 1938, it was new, high-tech. They floodlit the playground so it could be used at night for evening games as well. And this is one shot. Open-air schools. I've mentioned open-air schools for tuberculosis treatment. But it was also available for nursery education. The first one was set up, it's now the Rachel Macmillan School in March 1914, and that's what they look like. The idea was that you spent most of the time outside, or if it was pouring down with rain, you would have the door or windows open, but you'd still be dry inside. And this is Boston Park, which is outside of Bermondsey, Plumstead in Charlton, also pre-Great War. Finally, in 1938, they got this, which was the Contoria Way Nursery School. My next shot was actually a shot that my wife of young toddlers enjoying themselves in a pool, but my wife advised not to show it because basically they were all naked. It might offend people. So what does this mean for today? Well, we still have damp houses, don't we, in the rental sector? We've got an inadequate supply of social housing in the country as a general. Basically, the housing market's just continued, the private market. The Housing Association has just continued. What happened from the 1970s onwards was that council housing plummeted down to practically zero, particularly in the Thatcher years. Macmillan, when he was Prime Minister, Tory Conservative Prime Minister, in the early 1960s, we were building as a country 300,000 houses a year. The population has vastly increased since then. We're not building at that sort of rate. Air pollution is no longer, you can't see the air pollution. It's no longer from coal burning, it's from particulates. Yeah? It still affects people. You've still got respiratory diseases, COVID-19, to asthma. Yeah? You've got inadequate, in my argument, provision of street trees. Yeah? Local authorities, who are the main providers, are underfunded. I would ask a question, are we concerned for the beauty of our cities? Well, I would say not, in terms of London. Basically, a high-rise policy is each borough builds as high as it can get people to build. There's classic examples of development where no social housing at all. The Britain Rogers development just west of taking some Tate Modern, you might know. The popular quip there is, how many British passports do they have? Oh, there's lots of British passport holders here, British Virgin Islands passports. So a lot of the riverside housing is empty. It's just used as an investment. No statutory requirement for local authorities to provide parks and gardens. I went along to the House of Lords committee into parks and gardens about 5-6 years ago. And the local authority officers from Birmingham were asked about this. Should be a statutory duty for provision of parks and gardens? Should there be Act of Parliament requiring local councils? Of course, said the Lords there, it's House of Lords Committee, and there'll be financial provision, more or less. Yeah. No, they said. No, because they'd been mind washed. Yeah. Basically, anything that involved extra expenditure was not a good idea, according to the parks superintendent, whatever his title was, of Lowland at the time. Open air schools and forest schools, they've got a lot of history. One tends to forget. Vegetable gardens in schools. My primary school education was mainly in Longton Primary School, built in the 1920s, Lancashire County Council. The headmaster taught us how to prune roses in the courtyard in the middle. Each class had a vegetable garden. My grandchildren, or my children, have all been brought up in London. No vegetable gardens, no rose gardens to teach pruning in. Instead of which we have a national curriculum that Michael Gove developed. Do we take the advice of local authority, medical officers, health and environmental health officers, not on the experience of COVID? Look at the Institute of Environmental Health Officers and its outrage at what was happening in COVID. Tim has done this. Yeah. So that's the end. That's the first day of the blitz. They did not realise they cut off the people from the cheapest means of natural grace. They did not appreciate the curse and cruelty of others. And that's the sources that I used. I found this fascinating. Thank you very much for.
Many thanks, Robert. Yes, I used the slide of the bomber over Bermondsey Docks myself when we worked on the scheme back in the 1980s.
Anyway, painful inch E111.
Any immediate questions for Robert? I have one myself, but
just a comment, really. I would add to Robert's strapline about local authorities not having any obligation to provide parks and gardens. They don't have any obligation to maintain parks and gardens.
That's actually what I meant. Yes, absolutely correct.
Yes, but sorry, carry on.
For example, any financing that there was, particularly National Heritage Fund, was capital finance. So go to the Peace Park in Halifax. You've got a lovely cafe there. Closed. It's still there. Yeah.
Now, let's get on to debate until later. Clarification, Christy.
I was going to, I suppose you could see from Robert's slides, especially, and obviously Jan's, the sort of where the parks departments came from, sort of the rise and the rise and the rise. And I think.
Is this a question?
I'm not sure. I don't know. It's just, it was Robert's last slide was really interesting because you could see in the way that we seem to be going into reverse. So I don't know whether it's a comment or a question, but that worries me that we're getting into.
To give you an answer, there's a rise and fall.
Yeah.
Departments.
Yeah.
Nationally.
Yeah.
With exceptions.
Yeah, and you can see why politically.
Let's come back to this.
More on this later on.
Yeah.
You had a question?
Yeah, well, we can debate this later after we're all sitting there about statutory requirement of councils having to provide parks. I mean, this has been debated for God knows how long. well, I would say fairly recently, even with the level of APSI associated with public service excellence, where the park should be statutory. I mean, there are things that, I was in parks for 5 years, that there are certain things that are statutory, with libraries, allotments, but there are some of them are pretty poor, to be honest. So statutory is not necessarily the right way to go about it. But should we be requiring parks departments or councils to achieve a certain standard? That's maybe what we should be looking at, is that you've got to bypass at a certain standard. So we could debate this later on, because we could.
You know, just quickly, if I may, Tim, just give an instance. Newcastle, was it in the 1990s? They decided to speak. What was then equivalent to the Parks Department? Decided to withdraw funding from all its parks.
Yeah.
The funding was reinstated by the Health Department.
Right. I mean, Newcastle are in trouble. That Urban Green Newcastle now, and they've gone down the one of the National Trust, and they've taken their key parks out to be managed by a new trust that is already financially in trouble. They're not making the books balance. So again, it's an experiment that is not working out as well as it should be.
I agree. Crystal Palace Park, for example, which I live very close to, has just been trustified by Bromley Council.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you. Plenty going to contribute to our debate later. I have one rather specific question. Please sit down. I hope it's not the question. The street tree planting that you showed. When we try street tree planting in this century, or even the end of the last century, usually we're told by engineers too many utilities, you can't do it. How did they get around that?
There are fewer utilities there that went telephone wires and so on, and they did it by simply going ahead and doing it. Some of their utilities were their own, Bermondsey Council's own, the two as I mentioned. They were also an electrical generating authority and a distribution authority, but there also were private electricity companies, private gas companies. But the downside of all that is losing such 600 trees a year due to vehicles and gas. They had problems.
Thank you, Robert.